Hello, my name is Stephen. About ready to do a new video. I'd like to do them more often, but my schedule and time that I have to spend with clientele certainly takes precedence. One of the things I do with my clientele is I do intuitive counseling sessions, and I come from the perspective of the intuitive sense, from the perspective as a monk, and also because of my background in the field of metaphysics, which is the study of cause. Today, I'd like to talk with people about something that I think is very important, especially in the idea of self-mastery. What is self-mastery? It's essentially overcoming your physical form, materiality, to realize there's more of an expanse to us than there is any level of limitation. And I think it was Marianne Williamson that once said that it's not so much that we are afraid of how small we are, that it's more significant in how great that we can be and that we're capable of. When I say to you, we are infinite creatures, the only thing that we really run into in the field of limitation is how we perceive ourselves and our physical reality. I honestly feel, and I was taught this as a monk, that one of the greatest teachers that we have is that of physical being, physical life. The interesting thing is, and the thing I'd like to talk with you about today, is the idea of addiction. And when I say addiction, I'm not necessarily talking about the idea of alcohol, drugs, or anything like that. No, I'm talking about something that has a greater level of depth than that in the sense of addiction. It's things we get ourselves caught up in. I mean, do you realize we can actually be addicted to our past? Do you realize that we can be addicted to things like depression, that we can be addicted to things like anxiety? And I know this because of the number of people that I work with day in and day out. And they do things in their lives that creates the sense of anxiety. They do things in life that create the sense of depression. And I've often wondered about that. I have to look into my own life. I'm a Vietnam veteran. Yes, I've been in combat. And let me assure you, there's one thing that the military has not yet figured out. And that's the idea of how do you get people by and through the idea of an adrenaline rush. I can certainly assure you that after a firefight or a combative situation in a combat zone is over, there you are standing there shaking like a leaf, not from fear, not from anything other than the experience of having that adrenaline coursing through your body. The same thing is true when we look at the idea of anxiety, when we look at the idea of depression. All of those very same things take place. In other words, we set ourselves up. So you got to ask yourself, why do we do that? It's because of physical form. It's because of material reality. It's because of the idea of what it is that we're sensing and experiencing. Believe me when I say to you that without a body, essentially consciousness, mind, being would all be pretty much, I would have to use the term useless. Why? Because we wouldn't really have anything that we could refer to as physical experience, which means all we would ever know in reality is theory. So the whole thing that I'm attempting to suggest to people today is the fact that how we allow ourselves to get caught up in things, that is an exceptional teacher if we were to use it from that simple perspective. Allow your body to teach you, allow experience to teach you. And in any experience, always approach it objectively. One of the things about us humans is we are incredible when it comes to comparative thought. What do I mean by comparative thought? That's easy. It's taking a previous experience and comparing it to a current experience. So we can establish some form of relationship within our physical selves. Well, in a sense, that can be an error. I'm not going to say a mistake, an error, because what we're doing is we're taking a historical idea that has occurred to us and we're comparing it to a current experience. When we do that with experiences, we do that with people, we do that with situations, we do it almost in everything that we do as humans. And my whole thing to you is don't necessarily do that. Because when you start doing that, you're going to be comparing everything to everything, attempting to give yourself a point of reference or a point of understanding. And to a great extent, what we're actually doing is we're limiting ourselves. We're limiting ourselves into the conditions that we've always experienced in our lives. Yes, we can be addicted to poverty. We can be addicted to struggle. We as a human can be addicted to so many different things. Is it as serious or as significant as, say, alcohol and drugs? On one hand, my response to you would be yes to that, but on the other, no, it isn't. Because any of those things that we seem to have an affinity for can be an addictive thing. And that can virtually spread into everything. And if we don't take an objective view of what our experiences are, we continue that cycle. Have you ever noticed how you have cycles in your life, how things seem to cycle back and cycle back and cycle back? There's a very simple explanation for that. Every experience is to give us understanding, an understanding of ourselves and how we as an individual operate in our experiences. And if we're expanding or growing, which is the only thing realistically that we can do, when we get those cycles come around to make sure that we understand everything about the cyclic nature of ourselves. That way, it occurs so that we can break those cycles, so that we can continue to expand, so that we can continue to move forward and progress in our lives as that human being. Whether we accept it or not, every single human being is on a journey of the search of understanding of divine consciousness within ourselves. And addictions actually can help us and they can prevent us from achieving that divine idea. I have other videos here that talk in great depth and in great detail about that divine nature, and I'm not going to take that time here today. If you want to understand that, go back and look for the ones where I talk about the divine being to which we all have. But the biggest stumbling block that we're ever going to have is these things that we allow to cycle around because we are addicted to them, whether we acknowledge it or not. And by the way, the first thing to break levels of anxiety, to break levels of depression, or whatever it is that you seem to be connected to, is to first accept it. That's correct, accept it. It's kind of like getting a headache. Don't fight the headache, because if you do, it's going to grow. If you have an addiction, don't fight that addiction, no matter what it is, and no matter whether you even acknowledge that it's a level of addiction like anxiety or like depression. I already know a lot of the comments I'm going to get on this are going to be, there's no way anybody can be addicted to that. Oh, really? I ask you to really consider before you offer me any comments on the idea that that is not possible. I know that even today, after 40 years of being away from Vietnam, I still have an addiction to adrenaline. I used to do things when I was younger in skiing and so forth where I would cliff jump. Why? Because of the adrenaline that I would get from doing things like that. I look at it today and go, there's no way I would do that. Yes, it's an adventure, but there's no way that I would even consider doing anything like that. Why? Because it's no longer necessary. But I assure you, that idea is still within me. And if I can find more subtle ways and more simple ways to bring that to pass in my life, I would indeed do it. And I'm just simply acknowledging that. The same thing that I'm suggesting to you, even about the idea of anxiety, just simply acknowledge its presence and existence and don't resist it, don't fight it. But reflect back on before the anxiety, as an example, shows up, as to what was going on in your mind. What situations have you put yourself in? What things have you created that are giving you the sense of anxiety? There's the addiction. There's where it comes into play. The same is true even in the idea of depression. We do those things. We look for ways to get ourselves depressed. Heck, I was diagnosed years ago, unbeknownst to me, that I was a manic depressive. Not even sure I know what that is. Why? I meditate all the time and I observe myself. And I don't put myself in situations that are actually going to create that sort of a thing. In fact, I'm not even sure I even know what sadness is because I haven't experienced it in so long. So how can one be, so to speak, diagnosed as a manic depressive? I don't know. Maybe they use a textbook and they're coming at you with theory or whatever. But in all sincerity, That's the clinical idea that they've offered me, and I can sit here and say to you that I really don't have anything to do with it. Why? Because I know that side of me is in existence. So I use that side of me for positive ends. And any human can do that. But you have to be able to be objective with yourself first before you can ever overcome anything. Look at a drug addict attempting to get away, just as a simple example from heroin. There are physical implications to that because of the physical attachments to that. The same is true with the idea of anxiety and or depression. We have to detox ourselves from the chemistry that we've created within ourselves. What creates that chemistry within ourselves? Our minds do, our self-perceptions do. Our minds control our entire physiological form. We know that in an intellectual sense, and we know that in a medical sense, but we don't necessarily live in that manner and understand that everything that is going through us is creating an exchange, an interchange of chemical reactions within our physical form. And much like the idea of adrenaline, you create things that take you into different directions, so to speak. And as we create those things which takes us into different directions, there's a level of detoxification that's going to go on mentally, emotionally, and yes, even physically, to remove those sorts of chemical interactions outside of our body or inside of our bodies is what I really want to say. And speaking of that, if you get used to, let's say, anxiety for the sake of this conversation, do you realize that your neural pathways within your physical brain are just simply accustomed to that idea? Well, excuse me a second, but that does fit the definition of an addiction because our neural net knows that, accepts that, and appreciates that in a demented sort of a way, and it creates those. So the whole idea to overcome things like anxiety or depression is to create different neural pathways within our mind. And we do that by changing how we think and how we operate inside our physical form. And as we do that, you'll begin to notice that there are things that create the sense of the addictive personality towards anxiety and towards depression, just the exact same way that happens when we talk about ideas of adrenaline. It's the exact same thing. So the first thing to do when it comes to those, any form of addiction, an addiction could be any habit that you execute day in and day out, maybe nothing more than an addiction. Here, let's look at it another way. Somebody that is experiencing difficulty with money. Do you realize people spend themselves into corners so that they can have that sense of struggle? Yes, people can even be addicted to the idea of struggle. The way you can notice it again is through patternistic behavior. I remember when I was a monk, my teachers used to talk to me all the time about patternistic thought, routine mental things that we do inside our head. Those are created and support the idea of addiction. A drug addict is just used to having the drugs in their body. An alcoholic is just simply used to having the alcohol in their body. Well, here's the funny thing. None of us can get away from our emotional sense. Not a one of us. It's not even possible. We are designed to feel. Why? Because we're human. We have physical form. And because we're able to feel, we form these attachments. These attachments turn themselves into an addictive format, so to speak. It's something that most of us, even clinically speaking, don't even really talk about. But we get attached to those behaviors. And as we get attached to those behaviors, they do indeed become addictive to us. And because they become addictive to us, we have the sense where we need that. Whether it's the subconscious need of anxiety, whether it's a subconscious need of depression, or whether it's a subconscious need to spend ourselves in a corner. Every single one of those is something that every single one of us can overcome if we so choose to do it. So the whole idea of self-mastery is understanding your own particular operating principle, how you do things, and then begin to shift them slowly. Look, no human can change everything about their life all at once. That's the hugest error I think anybody can make. But what we can do is we can take different aspects of our different personality attributes, so to speak, and we can shift those simply one at a time. By shifting one of those at a time, we end up shifting the neural nets within our brain. We create new neural pathways by new behavior. And as we do that, we slowly move away. Now, here I'm saying that slowly move away from any forms of attachment that we may have. Ultimately, if one does that through the appropriate use of objective observation, self observation, then we can move away from any and all of those behavior patterns that we have. What we find after we do that, after we've broken all of those mental routines, is a new view of ourselves. When we have that new view of ourselves, we are mastering that level of ourselves to put us into new internal dynamics. Once we have new internal dynamics, our outer world changes. Imagine a life where you are free of any and all attachments. Imagine a life that you are free from any illusions of things that could potentially hold you back from being the greatest person that you could be. You see, I think it's really easy for us to live in a small manner, to have our addictions, to have those cycles, because those are things we believe we know and understand. When the truth is, we only know and understand the tip of the iceberg. Man, it's well worth seeing the expanse of you beneath your own surface. And there's only one way you can ever do that, and that's by literally overcoming the body. Look, that's not about ignoring your body. No, that's not the point. The point is not allowing your physical attachment or your physical form to control how you live and how you operate. Become that observer of yourself. Learn to recognize your patterns. Learn to recognize your triggers. You know, I've often wondered, how is it that everybody in the world seems to know what our hot buttons are, and they also seem to use them and play them like a fiddle? Well, that's actually simple as well. We wear those right out front where absolutely everybody can see them. And you know what's interesting about that? Any of those hot buttons, we don't know exactly what they are unless we learn to pay very close attention to how we operate in any and everything that we do. That's up to us. That's always an option. What do you honestly think that living consciously really means? Living consciously just simply means that we're always consciously aware of ourselves, what we do, how we do them, and our behavior. In life, it's not really about things outside you. If you blame everything outside you for your behavior, then you aren't taking any personal responsibility for you whatsoever. In fact, if you blame everything outside you, the truth of the matter is you're actually acknowledging that you have no control over you and your life. Well, excuse me a second. If you don't have control over you and your life, then who does and what does? It's worth the journey to find that out. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Stephen, Dr. Stephen Hairfield. I hope you enjoy this short 18-minute video. You can find out more about me by visiting my website at www.hairfield, that's HAIRFIELD.com. I'm also known as an American monk. I studied the Mahayana Buddhist path in Tibetan Buddhism, which is the path of compassion. I'm an author, have many books out there. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. You can follow me there because I send this information out daily. And by the way, I also have a radio show that I do weekly, every Wednesday at 6:30 Pacific on Blog Talk Radio, and that's the Insight Radio Network. So when you go on Blog Talk Radio at 6:30 p.m. every Wednesday evening, hey, you can call in, you can ask questions, and we can converse. I always enjoy doing that, giving people knowledge live. And I really prefer that because it actually helps them understand themselves and themselves in their life. Thank you. I'll be putting out videos as often as I possibly can. May you have a blessed, conscious-filled, and enlightening day. Thank you.